Do they use any salt? Do they have access to salt?
They do now. I mean, they don't mine it. They don't go looking for, but the missionaries are now giving them things.
Right.
And so I have actually seen them. A matter of fact, on this last trip, what a trip, Paul. Like I was there for 2 weeks, and on the middle day of the trip, so I was there with a bunch of our Wild Fit coaches that came with us on the trip because they'd heard me telling these stories for all these years and wanted to come. So I took them. And then we had to take them all back. And we were then doing a changeover where Dr. Ara that I mentioned before, my friend Vaughn, we were going to go in and we're doing this series called it's a play on the gods must be crazy, but it's the boys must be crazy. And we went and lived with the Hadza for like a week, took no food. Like it was quite a thing. And what was your question? I just blanked on it. I got distracted by the magnificence of it.
The salt.
Oh, salt. That's right. So on that trip, I ended up developing appendicitis on the middle day between the two things, like the one day we weren't in the bush, thank God. And, we vacillated. Should I get the surgery and have it out, or should I just treat it with antibiotics? And the surgery was the recovery from an appendectomy is not instant. And I'm supposed to be out hunting with the Bushmen and stuff. It's not going to be easy. We went for the surgery. And thank God we did, because my appendix had actually perforated. If we'd gone into I'd have died. I mean, it was going to be bad. But then we got in and I had to start eating, even though I really had to start eating. And the Bushman came back and he had a hornbill and he boiled it. He had this like old, like sort of makeshift pot that he'd created out of whatever. And he boiled it. And then all of a sudden they grabbed a bag of salt and started putting salt in it. Huh. And I'm like, oh, so where did you get that? Oh, the missionaries. Now, salt is probably, as things go, I guess it's not so terrible a thing to give them, I suppose, but it's really not terrible to give them compared to what else the missionaries give them. And while I was there on this last trip, this woman pulls up in her missionary 4x4 and she says, oh, I'm here to give some stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to get into a debate with her. So I'm like, what are you leaving for them? And she says, vegetable oil and white flour. And I just didn't, what do I was like, oh, great. Thanks. I felt like I should tell her, but they've been doing this now for years and they just aren't catching on. Paul, I saw my first ever, I'm not fat shaming her. I'm just saying I saw my first ever heavily obese bushwoman ever. Of course I've never seen one. It's not, you cannot get overweight out there. You cannot, nature doesn't. But she was. And why? Because at one point, the missionaries convinced her to come and stay at the school for a while with them. Now she's eating ugali, which is a local African wheat meal type thing. She's eating cornmeal. And she's almost certainly pre-diabetic, if not diabetic. And she's massive.